I'd like to show you how we do value studies in the more traditional medium. So I started with this one to show really big design shapes, because if we're going to lay out and make an interesting design, a lot of times starting with big forms and big shapes is going to help us. So you can see in these cliffs, if you squint your eyes at the photo, it's starting with some pretty large shapes. The big large shadow shape, the light shapes, and the sky shape. And then you can reduce within. But if you can see those values fairly quickly, then the modeling can happen within those in temperature. I started, like I say, this one's a little bit easier to see, I think, and eventually they'll get a little harder and harder on how you divide those. But dividing value into just 3 values is surprisingly difficult, but incredibly informing. Once you get used to doing it, you will group things in a way that may surprise you. So these are what I'm putting in there, sky. You might notice on the left top corner of these cliffs, when I was painting that area, I brushed in there a little bit, but I was softening it. I don't want to make too many hard edges right to the side of the canvas to keep your interest in the right place. You may also notice that throughout this, I don't go backwards. When I paint, I'm always moving forwards. I'm not erasing. I'm using whatever paint I have in the next shape to erase out or clean up the last shape. I find that a much more successful way to work. Otherwise, the perfectionist in all of us may make us just erase too often and not move forward. So now this one's a little bit more difficult of a scene. If you see these are just wagon wheel ruts in the middle of Wyoming and appearing like there's not much to work with. So I want to show this in comparison. One where the values really are distinct, but this we still have a mountain range in the distance that we can work with, and we also have the different types of low brush to work as a value, and also the shadow cast by the ruts left in the ground. So because I only have 3 values, as you can see, I had to make that choice of what value do I use with the ground compared to the sky? Do I use the same value? How can I make the mountains appear to stand out, and also the shadows underneath the bushes, etc. So you're going to see in the end here, I am going to cheat a little bit. I will actually pull this to 4 values because I'm going to leave the white of the canvas for the ruts to really pull that out as it goes into the distance. But that's a reduction into 4 values. That's still holding a pretty tight value range. So I had always set a goal for myself as a painter that I would draw so often and so much that eventually I would be able to draw with my paintbrush. So you may notice when I'm doing these paintings that I don't do an initial sketch. So if you feel like you need to, that is completely fine and a valid way to paint. I try to lay it down in shape and value from the beginning because it helps me see shape even better. I wanted to leave this one because this is another somewhat difficult scene in grouping values. We started, with the big, easy, giant shapes, but now we have to find how are those trees going to group together. Are they going to group as one? Am I going to separate one from a coconut tree from the other trees, the papaya, etc., other things we're seeing? How am I going to deal with edges? And as I paint in large shapes, you can see in order to paint in this technique, I have to carve with whatever value I have next to it. But the main reason for doing it is I'm trying to design with shape, not line, so the earlier I can start with shape, the better. One thing about reducing in values is a truth that we all find many places in life, that too often in the world we think limitations are a way to imprison us, but limitations are an incredibly freeing facet of life, and it's no different with painting, that when I try to hold 3 or even 4 values, it's more freeing because I have to think a lot more. It reminds me of, there's a story, I believe it was John Adams, one of the forefathers of the United States. And he wrote a letter to somebody, which at the end of the letter he said, "I'm so sorry this letter was so long. I didn't have time to shorten it." That's pretty interesting to me, meaning, hey, if we just write real quickly, we are not going to be as thoughtful as if we edit, cut it down, and reduce it so it's even easier to read on the other side. Well, that's what these value studies are doing. They're really reducing it. So instead of taking all the information, taking 20, 50 values, reducing it to 3 or 4 is really editing that letter down to just the key information. As I work on this Sierra piece, decisions that needed to be made. What value was the snow going to be in the shadow area there? And what was it going to be compared to the sky? What I ended up doing was it's the same value and the same value in the water. So I'm repeating values, and that's kind of surprising at the end. I think they will look like they have many values, but they don't. In this one, in the white of the snow, I'll keep that white. So this will also be for value. So I wasn't able to keep this one to 3, but the fact that I could keep that to a 4 value with snow, and in the end product, I think it's not lacking at all in value. I don't look at it and think, oh yeah, it needs 5 more values. But when I get into my painting, and I've already made these decisions, the process is going to be a lot easier and a lot quicker. So the minutes I spend on each one of these, and they really are minutes that I'm putting into each one of these. These are not, I'm not refining them and making this, oh, by the way, right there, what you saw me do is I think just some paint fell off my paintbrush onto the bottom of that canvas, so I just wiped it off. But the time that I'm putting into these studies will directly pay back when I go into the final. So, and they're just minutes. You know, you're spending 5-10 minutes on each of these, and the reward is huge later when you start getting into color. First, this tree scene this is a spot in Wyoming. Just as you can see in these paintings, I'm really trying to give you a variation, different scenes and how I would handle them. What am I using? I'm using paint called Portland Grays. It's made by Gamblin, the company Gamblin. I am a huge fan of them, a huge fan. And the reason I'm a huge fan is you can get 3 values. One is Portland Gray Deep, one is Portland Gray Medium, and one is Portland Gray Light. So I use those 3. You can also use white and then use a black, and that gives you 5 values. But I use those 3, and the reason I love them so much, as you can see in these paintings, is they don't have a temperature bias. And what I mean by that is you get lighter or darker. Let's say you just do the same thing and you just use black and white. You can do that, but you will notice as you lighten your black with white, it will change temperature because the white will cool the black so much. Where in these there's no temperature bias, so it's not pushing or pulling in temperature, so you can just worry about value as if you were working in charcoal. You could do these in charcoal as well. If you choose to do these, you may notice that I am not blending. I do not think there's a great advantage. If you're doing value studies, there could be for other reasons, but doing value studies to blend them, meaning I am not creating more values with these values. I am using them more like puzzle pieces or a pen marker that you have to stay true to that value. The sky value I just painted, it will stay sky value. The ocean will stay ocean. So it's much more of puzzle pieces that are fitting together rather than this final blended painting. And you can see that it still gives you all the information. On this cypress tree, I'm trying to build that value structure and how I'm using the dark parts of the trees or the shadows cast before I get into the light area. And when you first try these, you do have to know they will be difficult. Organizing in this fashion may cause some struggles, and you might look back and think, wow, that looked a lot easier when John did it. Well, I've done a lot of them. So if you struggled in doing them, you're either blending too many values or you haven't done enough. That could be another factor, is you have to do many of these. I've given assignments to people where I say, okay, I would like you to do these just for the next month or the next week. All you're going to do, like the next 20 paintings you're going to do, are these Portland Gray value studies. And they're a blast. I mean, when you do them, I think you'd be surprised how fun they are. When you're taking out all the worries of color and worrying about value, you really start thinking of the abstraction of design. You can think a lot more about design because design's happening a lot with value. And if that's the only thing on your mind, value, edges, design, and not thinking about color, you can have great growths in those areas. Okay, so now going into the spot down on the coast here, and just like the others, building this value. Sometimes, I'll start with a mid value, but on these, most of the time, I'm starting with a dark value. And right there, that was the only time I've erased the whole time working on these. I saw that paper towel come in and just lift something off. Probably a little piece of paint fell in the wrong spot, but I'm not worrying and erasing. Please remember that. I can't give that advice enough, because none of us will be developing to the level, including myself, all the time the way we want. And we will tend to be frozen by going backwards. We'll draw, we'll paint, and then erase. Draw, paint, erase. And you never move forward. Just lay it down with the best of your abilities, the most confidence, and move on to the next. So you can see that decision needed to be made between the value of the ocean and the beach to make sure that they're separated, and then the value of the shadow of the cliffs and the light of the cliffs and the top of the cliffs.